Well, people with an insect kink certainly were feast in this week. And then suddenly we're not. Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well and welcome to my review of the mid-season finale of Invincible Season 2, this episode titled It's Been a While, and episode 4 I should say, of this season. As per usual, while I have read the comics, I'm not going to be doing any future spoilers for the series, and I will only be talking about this episode and sort of maybe some comparisons to the comic, as well as I will talk mainly spoiler-free for the most part at the top, and I'll slowly get more and more into spoilers as we go along for this episode. But starting off spoiler-free, just sort of general thoughts about this episode. Finally, this episode picked up the pace of this entire season. Last episode really started to get into the groove of the slower pace of the season that we've been getting so far. But this one really picked up and really started giving us the larger scale threat and thrust of where this series will be going to for the foreseeable future with the Omni-Man and the Viltrumite storyline that was sort of really honed in on at the end of last season. So it was really nice to start picking it up and really start building the stakes of that this episode. So much so that honestly, I'm a little bit frustrated that this is the mid-season finale of the show. It's one of those really frustrating things where we've been getting shorter and shorter seasons of shows more and more lately, like even 6-episode seasons for things like Disney Plus and stuff like that, and other places as well. And I think 8-episode seasons are decent. I prefer 10 or 13 episodes overall. I think that's a good solid chunk of episodes for a show, 13 being my ideal, honestly. But 8 is okay. You can deal with 8, but to split it up into 2 episode chunks, and we're not going to get the next section until next year, especially after so long a wait for season 1, and just having this episode finally be the one that starts building momentum, it's honestly kind of frustrating. I'm almost at a point where I kind of almost wish that they had held these 4 episodes so they would release alongside the next 4 so that we could just keep going with the momentum, because really just the series was just picking up steam, and then we lose it again, and that's kind of going to be frustrating overall. It's not really a knock on this episode or hell even the writing or anything like that. It's more than likely an Amazon decision, so put it on them, but it is just sort of a frustration that I was feeling as I was really, really digging into and enjoying this episode. Let's go with the stuff that we'll all be wanting to talk about, the Omni-Man storyline last. So let's start off with Deborah's storyline that we've been following this whole season. I think this is actually a really good capstone, hopefully. I'm sure she's going to have frustrations as we go into the series, but I think this is a good capstone to her kind of arc for the first 4 episodes of her isolation and loneliness and kind of depression after Omni-Man, especially this being the episode where he comes back for Mark. Her kind of realizing she doesn't need him, I think was a really good final moment for this, her going and trying getting a final moment, like speaking at his grave and sort of like, why did you do this? You weren't ever real. Her coming to that realization, and then meeting with Art, the sort of costume designer from season 1. And I'm saying you never needed him. You were always the strong one, and her kind of coming to that realization. And I hope that this is the end of that arc, because the comics got way too dark with her storyline and almost over the top with it to a degree. And I think that this series has done a great job of showing that similar storyline, but in a much more nuanced way. And so I hope that like the next bit will be her sort of stepping out on her own, and then as we sort of see stuff with Omni-Man sort of come up through Mark, it will be an interesting sort of juxtaposition for her. So I think that is a really, really great place for her arc to go into. The other major storyline this episode is we get Adam Eve on Earth, and this was fine. I think this is probably the weakest storyline for me, even throughout this whole season, but especially in this episode, because we sort of get her coming back, trying to connect, trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. She's sort of been very aimless, and she's trying to find Mark to help do that and figure out what she wants to do as a hero, and then she ends up fighting this guy in the old like Teen Titan sort of team that we had in season 1 with Robot and everyone, and Rexplode and Duplicate and all that, and then causing these 2 older folks to potentially die on the bridge, and sort of causing her to kind of question is like, do I want to be a superhero? Do I want to constantly be putting people in danger? It feels to a degree, almost I mean, I guess it raises the stakes on the decision and the thought process that she's going through, but it almost feels like a minor reiteration of what we already got a few episodes ago with her family. And again, it's not bad because it does raise the stakes and really will make, you know, whatever decision she makes going forward fall into place. But it also wasn't the most dynamic to watch, just because it was like I didn't care about this guy that she was fighting. You know, these people that she was trying to save just kind of get saved at the last minute, and the arc itself is somewhat reiterative. So I felt overall that it was kind of the weakest. Not bad, not you know, not something I hated, but I was sort of like, yeah, this is fine. The other storyline we got that I actually, despite the fact that it had very little screen time this season and only really gets drawn out this episode, I actually ended up really liking, which was the Donald storyline as Donald goes around and finds out that he is, something's going on with him. He's a clone or a robot or something like that, where he goes back to the site where the original version of him that we knew in season 1 was killed, and he sort of discovers his glasses, and then sort of looks up stuff and sees that he died in season 1 and sort of like stabs himself. And I love that moment where he stabs himself and sees blood. He's like, oh, thank God. And then we see the knife tip dented in. It's such a great visual way to sell that moment. It could have been very easy. Like the series could have very easily done, like he cuts open his skin and we see like circuitry or, you know, something or other inside of his skin. But doing it that way sort of like shows his interior hope of like, I hope I'm real, I hope I'm real. It shows us that without telling us that at any point. Like it gives us an external version of his emotional place and his relief, and then shows us that moment of, oh God, no, it actually is true. There is something weird going on with him. So I just thought the way that they depicted that was so effective, especially for how short a time they had. We only got one hint at it back in episode 2 where Deborah sees Donald and was like, that's Donald, he's still alive. And then we get a couple scenes with him in this episode that fully completes that arc. So despite its limited screen time, it really works very well, despite that, or in fact because of it, because he is by no means a character that I care too much about. I also like, by the way, Deborah, speaking of Cecil, so pushing Cecil away, say, I don't need anybody, I'm going to do things on my own, and sort of again gaining that independence. I didn't really mention that earlier, so loved all of that. We also have the Mauler twins in here. Again, very minor screen time, but kind of works considering that, we see this dynamic of, they now know who the clone is because one is clearly disfigured, and then the clone killing him and sort of being like, well, there's a way things work for a reason. Again, I won't go too far into that. I think it's interesting. I think it gets more interesting in the comics, but I don't want to spoil. So I'll sort of leave it there as like, I'm curious to see where that storyline goes. I do like some of the philosophical stuff that the Mauler twins do bring up in their storyline as it progresses. So nice seeing the brickwork being laid in their storyline is the best I can really say at this point. But then this brings us over to the meat of this episode, which is everything going on with Mark and Omni-Man over on the bug planet, as I'll call it, because I can't remember the species names. And I just, when I read this section in the comic, I thought it was so cool where we meet a bug planet where they just age really quickly and their idea of their society just is much quicker. We don't get as much of an exploration of it in here as we do in the comics. It's not much more in the comics. We do get a little bit more in the comics about them. And I just always found that idea fascinating about what a society that would only have a year-long lifespan would be like, and insectoids make kind of sense. So I thought that was a little cut short for me, but what I did like is all of the emotional stuff with Mark and Omni-Man, where Mark is first relieved to see him. Is like he's got so much emotional investment in his father. It's his father. He hugs him first, but then sort of says, what about you? Sorry, what you did is unforgivable. And we're starting to see Omni-Man's change over the course of this episode. I mean, we saw that he was somewhat different back on Earth because he didn't just straight up murder everybody and genocide everyone of the human race. But him struggling with that, and then him struggling and trying to find new context for who he is on this bug planet without the context of his love with his mother, but also in a way kind of like trying to replicate that while also creating some distance. It's just a great complicated way of showcasing his character, of like he still is a ruler, he still likes to be in charge, and yet he's now feeling more of a sense of responsibility and desire to help and have empathy for people that he would up until this point would view as less lesser life forms, even less so than human beings. But even within that, we start to also get the idea of the Viltrumite mindset that we're so programmed into Nolan, the very fascist way of seeing the world of like, you know, humans are lesser than Viltrumites, but they're even more they're more humanoid than these bug people, so they're even less so. So him sleeping with a bug person is even more of a just no in their fascist mindset. They're a very eugenics minded way of seeing the universe, and we get that through him. But then also when the Viltrumites do show up on the planet, and by the way, loved the design of the one girl who had like a knife in her hair. I don't maybe I'm misremembering, but I don't remember if she was designed that way in the comics. So if that was a new addition by the show, again, I may be misremembering. But that, like a knife hair lady, here for that. Very much here for that. But we also, again, without the show telling us, we get evocations of their ideology where Nolan kills one of them and they sort of say, well, he deserved his fate. Again, very fascist in its viewpoint of like only the strongest survives, you know, survival of the fittest. Everyone's predator or prey, and if they get killed, well, then they deserve to die. Just, again, very fascist. But we don't get that stated to us. It's shown in terms of how they're like, they don't care that their colleague dies, like he's dead. I guess he deserved to die. Oh, well. And so very fascinating to see all of that. And Nolan's moment of like, why do I care? Why do I have empathy for these people? And why is this better? Why is emotions better? And Mark's just saying this is the way you should have been, and that getting through to Nolan, I think that works really well. And it's one of those difficult things where you look at how fascists are often deprogrammed. It's through finding empathy and through being in connection with people that they originally viewed as lesser, you know, and finding empathy for that. It's very dangerous. It's very hard to do, and sometimes you can't do it for every fascist. Sometimes you just have to punch a fascist. But if you are able to do that, that is the way to do it. And I think the show is showcasing that empathy, but also not letting Omni-Man get off the hook for accountability, I think in a really nuanced way. So I'm enjoying that so far with his character. And the fight sequence was a lot of fun. The brutality of it, like her getting like smashed in the face, was fun. And then Nolan getting taken away by the Viltrumites, potentially to be executed, is also interesting as well. But then we get Clancy Brown at the end of the episode as one of the Viltrumites saying like, "Hey Mark, you don't really have a choice. Either you go back and you subjugate the humans, or we'll do it for you and kill a hell of a lot more people. And kill you as well." So very, very interesting ending to this mid-season episode so far. Again, it's kind of upsetting though, considering that, you know, we have to wait several months before we get the back half, or just when the series is getting momentum. But overall, I really loved this finale. What did you think of it? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below. Beyond all of that, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.